I'm really excited about the genomic opportunities. If I was a commercial beef producer, I'd be wanting to test my commercial females and figure out who are really the elite ones, and then let's go build our replacement heifers out of those. And the progress that we could make in our own cow herd, I think is absolutely huge. And then I think we could lay, some more precision matings on top of that and take the bottom 70% of that cow herd and mate them to some really terminal bulls and make some awesome feeder steers.
Welcome to the Future of Beef Show, produced in partnership with Drovers and Breeder. This is the #1 podcast for progressive ranchers and feeders looking to run smarter, more profitable, next generation operations. I'm your host, Jim Johnson from the Brands and Barbed Wire podcast, joined by Dr. Jessica Sperber, feedlot specialist at the University of Nebraska, and Ian Wheel, founder of Breeder, the cattle tech company helping producers raise, track, and trade high-performing cattle. What happens when you combine dairy precision with beef performance? In this episode, we sit down with Lorna Marshall to unpack the past, present, and future of beef on dairy. Lorna Marshall is the Vice President of Beef Genetics at Select Sires and a nationally respected leader in beef AI and genetic strategy. Lorna has been a driving force behind some of the industry's most significant advancements in sire selection, maternal function, and now beef on dairy. This episode is sponsored by Corteva Agriscience. When weeds and brush get in the way, you'll find the solution at rangeandpasture.com. Lorna, welcome to the Future Beef Show.
Thanhave for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're excited. So for the folks that maybe don't know Lorna Marshall,
sure.
You have quite an extensive history in the AI business, and that would be artificial insemination. It's interesting we have to explain that these days, right?
Exactly.
But tell us a little bit about your background and you growing up and how you got into this space.
Sure. Well, so I'm a native Kansan. I grew up on a small Simmental operation. My dad was actually a petroleum engineer, and I was really active in the American Junior Simmental Association, which, if you know much about that junior program, it's very educational based. So, I grew up doing sales talk and sire summary quizzes and showed heifers too. Then I went to junior college and livestock judged and ended up at K-State and judged on their reserve national championship team. And from there, I had a instructor, Dr. Linda Martin, who was very influential in my life and ended up going to CSU and doing a master's in animal breeding and genetics. And there I met my husband, who I think has been on this podcast, Troy Marshall. And
it's great, but you're going to be better, don't
worry.
Is there a competition between husband and wife competition? Yeah. So you get more views, right?
Hey, we're all down for that. So let's make sure I win that one. Okay. All right. And so from there, once we graduated from CSU, we worked in Denver. I was at a breed association. He was at Cattlefax. And we bought a ranch out in eastern Colorado, became registered Angus and Sim Angus breeders, and ranched in eastern Colorado for about 25 years. And within there, I left the breed association and went to work for ABS and did sire acquisition there for about 16 years. And then worked at GenX for about 4.5 years doing large herd marketing. And then I had the opportunity to move to Select Sires and kind of combine everything I had done for the past 20 years. And so I'm the vice president of the beef program at Select Sires and get to work with absolutely the best team in the AI world, I think. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. So kind of tell us about how that industry's evolved over your career, the artificial insemination business and the different companies and just how all that's evolved and ebbed and flowed. I think there's some that were, probably there when you started that aren't there now and some that are bigger. So how's all that taking place?
Sure. Yeah. So, if you look back 25 years ago, there were most of the AI companies started out as co-ops, mostly because if you look at any AI organization, about 80% of their business or more will be dairy genetics, and the other 20% is beef. So we've always kind of been the redheaded stepchild until the invention of beef on dairy, which we'll talk about. But so it was really dairy producers going together, starting these co-ops so that they had access to the best genetics. And so there were, I don't know, probably 15 co-ops in the United States. If you would go back and look at like the 1970s and 80s, and, they were responsible for bringing in the European genetics. So Simmental, Charlet, all of those early on. And like a lot of other ag industries, as we've kind of progressed, we've just seen a lot of consolidation. And so today, there's really only 3 or 4 major AI organizations. All of them are very global at this point. So they do business all over the world instead of just in the United States. And, and then we've seen some new entrants like ST Genetics, for example.
Yeah. So I know a lot of them that where the co-ops merged or whatever, they merged under one sort of umbrella, but you guys kind of kept some co-op names out there, didn't you?
Yeah. So actually Select Sires is the only co-op AI organization that is a co-op left in the United States. The rest of them are now, either publicly or privately held. So that's what makes us, really unique. But yes, we have a unique co-op structure in that Select Sires Incorporated that I work for is really our product development arm. And then we have member co-ops, 3 member co-ops underneath us that are really the marketing arm for the organization.
Yeah. I thought that was something kind of unique. Yeah. Interesting. So as we get into how is Sire acquisition maybe changed over the years? Just curious and I'm sure a lot of listeners would like to know, how do you guys decide which bulls to acquire and some things like that?
Yeah. And how's that changed? Because it started with just fertility, and that was basically it, as far as I understand. So on the beef side, anyway. So,
yes, very much true. So if you go back to the beginning of my career, one, we had a lot more major beef breeds back then than what we do now. So we were acquiring bulls for probably 9 breeds. As a matter of fact, that's really how I got my first acquisition job at ABS. They had gone through some downsizing, and part of the beef department was let go. And so I remember us sitting around a table saying, like, who's going to go buy the bulls? And they're like, well, at that point, my husband had worked for a couple of breed associations. I'd worked for one. We were Angus breeders. And like, Lorna knows more people and more breeds than anybody else. She can do it. And that's really how I got into the acquisition space. But, we had, 9 or 10 major breeds that we were acquiring bulls for. We had a lot less EPDs and indexes. As a matter of fact, that was kind of on the beginning of where we went from EBVs to EPDs, which is really going to date me at this point because,
Don't worry, if you're in England or Australia, it's still an EBV. So we're all good. Awesome. You can be very young.
Yeah. And, it really was down to core traits. We weren't really into a lot of the convenience traits we have today. So, birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, and milk. Where for some breeds, they had maybe 4 EPDs. And, since then we added calving ease, and then we got carcass traits. And now we're working on, some of the type traits like foot traits and udder traits. And, so, it's just really evolved a lot over my career for sure. So as far as, how do you get a bull into the stud, or how do we select bulls? Honestly, that recipe has not changed as much as maybe what people think. I think anybody that would be in my role at one of, the competing organizations, we would all tell you the same thing, in that generally our seed stock customers, not all, so I don't want to, and Jim, I know you are a seed stock, provider as well, but they're generally more on the edge of selecting for the extreme in the traits, and they're trying to be breed leading, whereas our commercial customers have almost always selected more for balance in what they do. But really the secret sauce to getting bulls that are going to sell lots of semen would be that, they combine phenotype and genotype, and then their pedigree is always, very important, particularly like in the Angus breed, where we have a really high adoption of AI. So over 50% of the calves that are registered at the American Angus Association are the result of AI or ET. And so there we're really looking at the high use sires and trying to figure out what pedigrees we go get to make back to all of those high use sires, because there would be obviously a lot of daughters, that would need to be bred out of those bulls. So,
yeah, it's interesting. So you had mentioned 9 breeds early on. How has that breed mix changed? And I think we probably know the answer, but how has that breed mix sort of changed throughout your career?
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, some of those small breeds, have probably become less significant to the point that we don't include those in, what we do. And we've just seen, a lot more. Obviously, Angus has grown significantly. I would say within the industry, it's 75 to 80% of all of our sales, and I'm talking all of the major AI studs. And then obviously Red Angus, Simmental, Charolais, Hereford would make up a lot of those sales. There is also a portion that, focuses on like Brangus and some of the eared breeds, but that's become a smaller part of our business.
Yeah. How about the increase of like Wagyus? Do you guys
Yeah,
any of those? It's kind of interesting.
That's a really unique breed. And obviously, I think all of us have a few Wagyu bulls. It's been interesting to watch. A couple of years ago, that was actually one of our fastest growing breeds. But I do think it is still a niche market, and we kind of overproduced, particularly where we utilized it in the beef on dairy space. And we probably oversized the supply for what a niche really high priced market can afford. And so I think they're kind of in the process of probably right sizing the supply and demand equation a little bit.
They've been lucky because some of those cattle are now going into like, cross programs and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. More conventional feeding programs.
And high marbling. And they marble really well.
They do.
I just don't like feeding them too much.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Growth and feed conversion need a little help for sure.
So maybe my final question before we get into beef on dairy is, over that career, you've seen trends, beef cattle trends, and ebb and flow, right?
Sure.
Big, small, whatever. Tell us a little bit about that, and then how that's sort of evolved into where we are today, and then how does it make it harder to maybe find the sires that you're looking for? Ever wondered if you could be getting more out of your cattle?
Breeder is the first technology company that's able to track and optimize cattle from conception all the way to the rail.
This puts the power of data into the hands of the rancher and enables them to improve their profit line quicker than they ever have before.
My decision to partner with Breeder was made largely after seeing a demo where I realized what Breeder's doing is unlike anyone else in our industry. Connecting the data from the packing plant back to the feedlot, the stocker backgrounders, and the cow-calf, even connecting that data to the purebred breeder, will just open the door to improvement at a scale and a speed that we have never seen in this industry before.
I believe Breeder's putting ranchers in the driver's seat. We can make breeding decisions based on large amounts of data very quickly. The calves that are produced, they have a higher cutout value, their ribeyes are more profitable, and it plays back to us.
As I'm out around the country, people are asking me about Breeder, and I always recommend Breeder. It's the tool for the future.
Yeah, I think there is always a pendulum changing or swinging, I guess, towards traits. And you're always going to have people that are more willing to go out on those pendulums further than others. And that's what I love about our commercial industry is they always, I think, kind of keep the seed stock industry a little bit grounded. I think if, at least at Select Sires, our thought is the closer we are to our customer and what they really want, the better off we're going to be. And, we need some of those extremes, honestly, to kind of move, the industry forward in different areas. I mean, look what we've done on traits like marbling. And, we've totally changed the beef demand dynamic because we've created a more palatable product that our consumers really like. But we do take some of these traits, to too far of an extreme. And so, but I'm not sure that's changed, Jim, over my career. Every time a new number comes out, we're going to take it too far. We just do. That's, human nature.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting as you looked at the dairy industry and the more numbers we had, it seemed to narrow up that gene pool a little bit too. The number of animals that could jump through all those hoops was much more limited. And how do you see that on the beef side? Do you think there's potential for that? And then how do we as breeders or producers sort of make sure we don't get into that pigeonhole?
Yeah. So one thing that you've probably heard me say before, but honestly, figuring out the beef industries, I think from a genetics perspective is pretty easy because generally whatever I see happen in the dairy world, beef is going to follow it by 5 to 7 years. And so if we just watch where the dairy industry is and what they're facing and how they're solving those problems, we can be prepared for it. To your point, one of the things that the dairy industry did is they've got a really narrow gene pool. And so, if my dairy counterpart from Select Sire was sitting here today, they would tell you one of their biggest goals is to create outcross genetics.
Yep.
It's not necessarily to breed the most extreme animals, but it is to breed more diversity into the population because they realize how important that is. And so I think that's actually something we've done a better job of on the beef side, is making sure that we don't narrow the gene pool too far and we continue to introduce, new genetics and create enough diversity in there that the breed has.
And how does that lead to you, like when you're thinking about, not just Select Sires, but all the genetics companies, like internal development of bulls versus like buying in? And because we know, the public facing is we see you at seed stock sales and we're like, hi, Lorna, good to see you. But like, how do you think about that sort of internal versus external development?
Yeah. So, pretty much all of the major AI studs at this point have their own internal beef breeding program. Select Sires was the last one to really initiate that part of our business. The reason that we did that is primarily all of them, across pretty much all the major studs, they're all very terminal focused. And it was because of beef on dairy. And we really felt like, and I think I can speak for all of the competitors, that we had to create a really terminal animal for the beef on dairy space. I mean, if you think about how commercial beef producers buy bulls, they're generally trying to make both feeder cattle and replacement heifers. And the type of bulls that we need to put on a dairy cow are so terminal, there is no way you want to keep any replacement females out of them. And so we knew that we were really going to be asking our seed stock producers to make something that they should not be selling into the commercial beef industry to commercial beef producers. And so it's probably better for us to make bulls that, we could really make very terminal focused without those animals. We can't ask seed stock producers to make those because they don't have a market.
Well, effectively,
for them,
they're going to ruin their own sales.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next question. It's a nice lead into it, but the difference in conventional beef semen sires and your beef on dairy sires, right? And what's that look like, and what are other differences? And you said they're more terminal, and then from there, what how's that, I guess, the sales and everything driven those decisions? Sure.
So we don't actually market any of our beef on dairy bulls that we make internally in the beef on beef space. We could, but we have bulls that we think are better for the beef on beef arena. And so we don't market our beef on dairy genetics into the beef on beef space. Generally they're going to be really high growth, very feed efficient animals, but we're selecting like for negative fat. So, they're not going to make easy fleshing females. Milk is not part of the equation. Fertility is not part of the equation. There's a lot of things that we leave out and focus just on a suite of terminal traits. And so we don't, Jim, see hardly any crossover in terms of, the bulls that are used in those two areas. Now that could be different maybe for some other AI organizations, but at Select Sires, that's kind of how we've chosen to do it. If you look at our beef on beef sales, there's still, and this has not changed over my career, but if you look at our top 20 bulls for sales, 15 of those 20 are going to be calving ease bulls because different from the dairy world, almost, 70% of what we breed in the beef on beef space is going to be heifers because they're easy to get our hands on. They're generally in a dry lot. They're easy for us to synchronize, whereas synchronizing cow-calf pairs requires more labor. So, those bulls are going to be very calving ease oriented. I would say the one thing that we've seen change probably over the last 3 to 4 years, and you've probably seen this as a Charolais breeder, but, we probably took the pendulum too far on calving ease, particularly in the Angus world. And we, both in the beef on beef and the beef on dairy space, we had a lot of complaints about they're too small, they don't have enough vigor, they're too short gestation length. And so we've really seen the commercial industry move the needle on kind of what they consider optimum calving ease and where the calving ease and birth weight EPDs need to be considered a heifer bull.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think in the beef on dairy space, what happened is we used beef on beef criteria to breed a mature Holstein cow. And we figured out very quickly that like she can handle a whole lot more than what we've been giving her. And, we probably reserved growth too much. And so, you've seen us really move the needle on kind of where the calving ease and birth weight needs to be for the Holstein population.
How is that breed mix? I think early on it was just assumed that you'd have Angus bulls and beef on dairy, but how has that breed mix changed any? And what do those offspring sort of look like?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that is it's going to look very different depending upon which AI organization you talk to. We've all taken very different strategies at attacking the beef on dairy space. Yeah. And so, I think there's a couple of organizations that have attacked the market more with composite bulls or hybrid bulls that are, crossbred like. Select Sires has taken the approach of we've really gone at it with, we've already got a Holstein cow and, we're going to put an Angus bull on her and we have an F1 cross and we're capturing that heterosis. So if you looked at our beef on dairy sales, they're going to be about 85% Angus. And then it's going to be a very small percentage of kind of Simmental, Limousin, and Charolais. Charolais would probably be the second breed behind Angus. But relative maybe to what the rest of the beef on dairy space is, we're very Angus focused at Select Sires.
I mean, before the great movement of 2018 with beef on dairy, there was operations that did limo bulls onto Holstein cows, beef on dairy in that scenario. So the Limousin breed was utilized largely for obviously its size of round and just the rear end that a dairy cow does not have. But yeah, it's interesting. I appreciate that you mentioned that it's, different breed or the different, genetics companies are doing different approaches because, for some of us, obviously in the Charolais breed, my parents are terminal Charolais Red Angus breeders. So our bull selection is all on a terminal basis. And so when we look at the beef on dairy scheme, I really appreciate your comment about we're looking to create bulls that are strictly for terminal characteristics, right? We're not retaining those females out of them. And I think that that's something that's so critical for any of our listeners to understand is that the beef on dairy animal is a terminal based animal. And so with that, then my big question is, so I'm obviously in the feedlot space, feedlot nutrition. We are obviously as an industry feeding a lot of female heifer, beef on dairy heifers. So, but the steer is the more profitable of those two animals. And so have you seen any movement towards sex semen being utilized in a beef on dairy crossbred?
There's nothing greater than seeing your cattle grazing on lush green pasture. Oh yeah, and nothing ruins that view like weeds and brush soaking up all the moisture and nutrients. Regardless of precipitation, we have to take care of our pastures. It doesn't rain grass.
The passion for cattle ranching starts early. So should the protection. Let's keep our pastures in good hands with Corteva Agriscience. To learn more, visit rangeandpasture.com.
Yeah, that is a great question. And that's honestly something we've been trying to kind of figure out. The biggest problem in the beef on dairy space is fertility is the most important trait. You can talk to a dairy producer. Fertility is 3 times more important than any other trait that we're going to talk about. And sex semen, while we have really improved that product a lot, it still does not have the same level of fertility and conception rate that
I think is that we did some numbers with a dairy and it was like a 5% drop in fertility was like $350 a year for that cow. So that's huge.
And sex semen would drop at an additional 15% unit points, or
it really depends.
Okay.
So it really depends on how good of management the dairy has and what the fertility of their cow herd is, because we have really improved the fertility of the dairy cow, but there's a lot of variation between dairies. And so some dairies are not going to see as much variation utilizing a sexed product versus a conventional, versus other dairies that maybe don't have the same level of management and the same level of fertility in their cow herd. So it's not something that you can apply across the entire dairy population. It's very dependent upon each dairy.
But any drop is quite a lot of money.
Exactly. So, any drop is.
And for something that might cost $10, that's a lot of money to lose $350 if they don't get it right.
Exactly. So we do see, we do have some producers that are utilizing sexed product, particularly if they have a calf program where either if they're selling them as like a calf ranch where there's a sex price differentiation where they're getting more for the steers than they are the heifers. We only have one calf ranch that we work with that actually pays differences based off sexes as day-old calves. So that's pretty unique in the beef on dairy space today. Most calf ranches pay the same for both steers and heifer calves at day-old. Or if they're retaining ownership and feeding them themselves, then they may see the advantage that you're talking about. But certainly we have not seen the adoption of sex semen in the beef on dairy space is what we see in making the dairy females with, you know, the elite portion of their dairy herd.
So backing up for just a second, just to clarify something, so our listeners, when you say fertility, are we talking about cow fertility? Are we talking about bull fertility? Or are we talking about both?
We are talking about bull fertility. Yeah,
Bull
in
fertility.
the beef on dairy space. Yes.
Because I think our listeners might think, oh, these cows need to be more fertile. And I think that's a part of it. But bull fertility is a big thing.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, if I could figure out how to improve bull fertility, you know, that would be the number one thing I could do to improve business for Select Sires or really any AI organization. Yeah, and the dairy world has been working on female fertility, and they've made a lot of improvement over the last 5 to 10 years. But yes, we're talking about bull fertility, and it's not a highly heritable trait. So, I mean, we have tons of Holstein data over years that if it was something that we could solve genetically, we would have solved it genetically by now. And so really the only way to prove fertility is to collect bulls, put up semen with really high quality control standards, and then breed them to, you know, 800 to 1,000 cows and find out how they perform. And you will sort out the high fertility bulls from the low fertility bulls. But if you don't have a fertility testing program, it's really hard to identify the differences.
And so from a conception rate standpoint, I mean, what's the difference between a high and a low? I mean, just to give an idea.
Yeah, there can easily be a 20 percentage point difference in conception rate between high and low bulls.
So you do our maths and we're talking $1,400 a cow for that year.
Yeah.
So, but just to sort of step back for people, because beef on dairy has been an interesting topic. I think most people know the history of beef on dairy, and like Europe was very different. Like Europe's been doing beef on dairy for decades and actually probably behind from an Angus. And we were breeding Belgian blues when I was over there, which I have no idea how that fits into the calving ease side of things. But talk us through, like, how did beef on dairy go from basically nothing, and we're doing a black and white Holstein calf 10 years ago, to where we are today?
Yeah.
Like, what was the, how did we get here?
Yeah. So I think it was, several tools coming together at the same time that kind of created the perfect storm. So first of all, we had, genomic testing in the dairy space that became very popular. We knew that we needed to improve the dairy female in a couple of different regards: fertility, health and wellness. And we had really, and they're fairly highly heritable traits to, milk production and components and all of those things. And so dairy producers started genomically testing. So then they could identify, the top third of their females. And then they wanted to create, the best cows out of those females. So they started using sex semen, which kind of about the same time started getting better in terms of fertility and those kind of things. So, dairy customers weren't afraid to utilize that product. And kind of at the same time, we saw where the cattle market was headed, and we knew that, they could breed the bottom into those females to beef bulls. You mentioned kind of the start of it. And honestly, I give Jerry Wolf credit because I think Jerry Wolf was honestly kind of the forefather of the beef on dairy movement in the United States. And,
it's an amazing business. Built there.
Well-known limousine breeder, true visionary, I think, within our industry. And, Jerry was, I think, really the first one to go around and kind of promote utilizing limousine bulls, which, if you think about complementary mating, it is a very complementary mating.
Makes
and,
sense,
honestly, if the drivers in the feed yard and the packing industry today weren't carcass weight and marbling, limousine might still be a really favorable cross. But I just think we've had enough of the, different economic signals in our industry kind of move folks towards Angus, particularly where they've had their focus when you look at their, trends for different traits. They're a really high growth, high marbling breed.
And I think, so while this was all going on, then like 2017, 2018, we obviously were in the rebuilding of our cow herd, and we got to a point where we had a lot of cows in the US. And in those times, the feed yards look at, well, I can feed a native animal for 70 days less than a straight bred Holstein. So I'm going to feed that native animal and turn my cattle through. And I was in my master's at West Texas A&M, and we would normally be gapped at the packing plant collecting feedlot data by a group of 60 to 100 straight bred Holstein steers. And then we go do another 300 head of our natives, and then we would get gapped again. And then in the summer of 2018, we weren't gapped anymore by straight bred Holstein steers. And so the packers had enough cattle to kill to keep their rails full. They had enough high quality native beef animals to do so. And so there was the movement of, hey, we need to add more value to these straight bred Holsteins because we don't want to be feeding a feed conversion of a 10-to-1. And so, and we want to be putting more pounds on the rail. Marbling was never an issue for Holstein animals. Still isn't today, obviously, very, very high quality grading. But the rest of the carcass attributes that we appreciate so much were so dramatically upgraded when you started crossing a beef animal onto that dairy animal, as opposed to just feeding the straight bred Holstein, especially in terms of muscle to bone ratio. Beef on dairy's muscle to bone ratio on the rail is very, very similar, like a 3.9 to 1 compared to a 4.1 to 1 for a beef animal, whereas a Holstein is all the way down in the low 3s. So and obviously variable, but it was a huge movement in terms of, we've got all these cattle to fill the yards now. We're at a really good spot. And how do we upgrade the bottom end of this beef production?
Yep.
Well, and the other thing you'd said earlier about genomics on the dairy side. And I think a lot of our beef producers think genomics is a purebred tool, right?
Yeah.
But it was really the implementation of genomics in that commercial dairy space that just ramped it up tremendously, right?
Yes.
And I think we see those similar opportunities in the commercial space in beef cattle, right? But I think for our listeners that really changed the industry on the commercial side, not just the purebred side.
Well, to Lorna's 7 years, like we're seeing big producers now that tested just the seed stock herds and now testing all their cows, and then next year we'll start to test all their cows and their steers from a genomic perspective. And for those that aren't, it's happening and it's going to continue to happen now. So it'll be really interesting. Would you say there's learnings that you've had out of that beef on dairy experience that now, as we start to look at the beef herd, what should we be looking out for? What's going to change? What can we learn from the beef on dairy into that beef herd?
Oh yeah, totally. I'm really excited about the genomic opportunities. So, if I was a commercial beef producer, I'd be wanting to test my commercial females and figure out who are really the elite ones. And then let's go build our replacement heifers out of those. And the progress that we could make in our own cow herd, I think is absolutely huge. And then I think we could lay some more precision matings on top of that and take the bottom 70% of that cow herd and mate them to some really terminal bulls and make some awesome feeder steers. And, the other thing that I think is coming is... Are you
saying we're going to get a terminal maternal
beef
industry?
I think so. If your cow herd size is large enough. I mean, I think there's still a need. If you look at our semen cells and the bulls that are at the top 5 of our list, they're still the balanced trait bulls that, they're not extreme anywhere, but they keep you between the 2 yellow lines and you can kind of do both with them. And for, when you think about the number of cows in the United States that are in a cow herd of 200 or less, we still really need those genetics. But I think if you're a really large producer, I think being able to look at, a more precise breeding program makes a lot of sense. But I think it'll be very driven by herd size, to be honest with you.
Interesting. I think it gets into the whole breeder aspect of it, right? Let's get into more precision management of these cattle, and then the better decisions we can make and the more profitable we can become if we do that.
Well, the interesting one is you look at where dairy was, and they were breeding their top 70% for replacements because combination of male and female, and they wanted to select it. And that is sort of where the beef industry is today, as we're breeding our top 70% for replacements. The dairy industry now breeds top 30% for replacements, and they're replacing their average lactations is something like 3 at the moment. And so in beef, when we've got say 5 calves that are coming out of that, we probably only need to be breeding the top 20% for replacements if you actually think about the replacement numbers. And that changes a whole different way of thinking about it versus where we are today.
Yes, it does. So, and then I think, when you look at just how successful some of these feeder cattle marketing programs have been, Angus Link, Angus Access, a lot of the programs that IMI has, I think traceability and known commercial cattle I think we're moving there really quickly. And I mean, I think beef on dairy is moving there as well. Today, there are some producers that we can characterize their beef on dairy calves genetically. And those calves bring more money and they're a lot more valuable.
And they perform better at feed. And
they do. And and I mean, breeders been super successful at helping make that happen. And, I think when you look at the success of some of these programs in the beef space, that's going to just continue to grow exponentially because those cattle are bringing huge premiums this year. So,
and did you hear she did that plug for Angus Link?
Very nice. Yeah,
we didn't hear that back. Did we? We didn't hear Troy talk about.
She did mention Angus Access, which Red Angus has just released as well. Though. So there was a balanced perspective there.
So with all that, Lorna, I mean, where do you see sort of the industry moving in the future? What's sort of the plans with select sires, and where do you think AI companies are going to be in the future as well? So it's kind of a big question, but where do you see this going?
In the beef business, every decision counts. Drovers delivers the expert analysis, market updates, and real-world reporting that cattle producers rely on to make smart, profitable decisions. From market updates to policy shifts and animal health, Drovers delivers expert reporting and real-world analysis that helps producers stay ahead. With a mission to help beef producers become more profitable, every story is built around what matters most to the cattle industry. Get informed. Get Drovers.
So I think genomic testing is going to be more widely used across, it's already widely used in the dairy industry, but it's going to be more widely applied in the beef space. I think traceability is going to grow. I know some producers don't like to hear that, but I think when you look at the success of programs like Angus Link, and I'm not just plugging them, but I think it is, showcases that feed yards just want you to characterize what the genetics are, and then they will figure out how to manage them, and they'll figure out what endpoint to target. And the consistency of that makes them a lot of money. And so I think they're going to continue to demand understanding the traceability aspects of it, how they've been treated, all of those things to a greater degree. And, I think from an AI company perspective, we do look at the US as somewhat of a mature market. Like, we're probably not going to change the needle a lot on terms of the number of cows, dairy or beef. We may not change the adoption of AI in dairy or beef a whole lot moving forward. And so, if you looked at our sales, most of those sales are going to be that really move the needle are in other countries. So Brazil, Australia, those are huge markets for us, at least in the beef space.
Yeah, I was in Australia recently, and the whole industry over there was like their beef on dairy is just very nascent. Like it is just about to take off. Similar for Brazil.
Yeah.
There's some really exciting stuff happening in those countries with beef on dairy.
So we look at, you mentioned 2018. We look at Brazil and Australia as 2018 in the beef on dairy space. Very low adoption at this point, and really staged to grow significantly over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said you don't see a lot of growth potential in the U.S. I mean, I know for a long time we tried to get more commercial breeders to AI, right? We tried to get them to AI. We tried to get them, and it just. I mean, it is there, and it's and the amount of them that are AI in cow herds is very limited, and it's in commercial heifers, and so it's interesting how as much hard as we worked, we really haven't advanced that segment of it as much as we'd hoped.
Yeah. So the one thing that will change that, Jim, is if Zoetis could come up with the one-shot love potion, is what I call it. So, today we have to put a cow through the chute 3 times to get her synchronized and bred. And honestly, it is not because people don't believe in genetics. They totally believe in the reproductive management advantage that gets by, moving their cows earlier into a calving season and all of that. It is completely a labor issue as to why we don't see the adoption of AI in the U.S. beef industry. And that's why, in Brazil, for example, they breed a whole lot higher percentage of their beef cow population via AI than what we do in the U.S. And it's because they have low-cost labor, and we don't have low-cost labor here in the U.S. So it is a labor issue. And so until we figure out how to synchronize that cow with less labor, it's going to be really hard to move the needle in a significant way.
Yeah, and you guys have done a lot of research in that fertility space for a long time too. So
yes, one of my predecessors, Roy Wallace, was really one of the leading proponents of a lot of the synchronization research in the U.S. So
So any other sort of trends or beef on dairy, beef that you guys are sort of looking at to target in the future?
Great question. I think
not giving any secrets
out.
It's a very small industry.
Intellectual property here.
It is, and I don't know if I think, we talked about growing, you've had some other speakers on the podcast. I mean, we're closely watching what's happening with all the red meat yield research, and obviously where we have a more Angus based sire lineup, figuring out how do we make Angus cattle that are going to compete with Charolais cattle from a red meat yield standpoint. What are these new grids going to look like? All of that. One of the things that we follow closely, and Breeder would be very close to this, but is, how are we going to value cattle differently in the future when we have traceability? And how are supply chains going to value those cattle once we have traceability? Because that is one of the unique things about AI is, unless you're utilizing heterospermic semen, we know who that animal is sired by. And so, there's a pretty high level of traceability that we can provide on those kind of animals.
And the ability then to adjust much faster.
Yes,
that's the exciting thing is, and that's what we've seen from beef on dairy, is that ability to know the sire on an individual calf, to then be able to not wait 10 years that it takes to develop a beef herd. You're within a year or 2 years, you're rebreeding to better semen and different semen, and it's moving very fast.
Yeah.
But it's like some of the other stuff, we had Taylor Engel on a while ago as well. Like I think some of the things we're seeing is that there's some amazing genetics now going in, but the innovation around actually hitting that genetic potential, whether it's health and welfare, all of those sort of things. And I think you guys have been big proponents of that for a while. And I think it's interesting to see how some of that's focused. You've done a really good job, but now what next?
Yeah. Well, and I think we're going to see whole new traits that we don't measure today. We're going to look a lot different. We may get rid of some of the traits that we have and measure things in a much more profitable way, age to harvest, or
loin length. Can we get one of those?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of potential, and obviously one of the big things that I think a lot of beef producers have probably become more aware of in the last couple of years is that the beef on dairy space does allow us to collect a lot more data, only because dairy producers are used to collecting a lot of data, and so it's very second nature to them. They already have a lot of the software and sensors in place to be able to collect a lot of unique data. And so, for a beef gal who's been in the beef industry forever, the thing I love most about beef on dairy is just, I love data. And I finally, for the first time in my career, have data to play with. And, and I think that's the thing that, beef producers are, I think if beef on dairy helps us in any way in the beef industry, it's going to be becoming more aware of the value of harnessing data, and to your point, how quickly we can make change when we do that.
Yeah. So Jess, what I heard her saying is they're going to buy more Charolais bulls in the future.
Yeah.
I think
I heard that
too. They are a great cross on Jersey cows.
The Jersey guys love a good Charolais. So and that's still a big part of the herd, and a lot of the dairy's going to milk, and so Jersey still plays a pretty big role.
Yes,
so.
exactly.
Yeah, I think it's curious about collecting the data on the dairy herds, but there is still going to be a limited number of terminal traits you're going to and we still need to collect this maternal data in these commercial herds. So we can really work on that side as well. And beef commercial herds, not dairy commercial herds.
Yeah. So we actually just had a meeting among kind of our beef team last week at Select Sires. And I would tell you from a field level, from our reps that are in the country, there is more of a maternal push in the beef space than there has been. I think commercial cattlemen are really starting to think about what are the traits I need to be focused on as we rebuild my nation, the nation's cow herd, and I start to breed my heifers and that. And so, we've heard the message loud and clear. We better have some maternal bulls in our lineup because beef producers are ready to start rebuilding the cow herd. They've kind of experienced a couple years of really high prices on their feeder cattle, and they're ready to start adding some cows back to their herd.
Interesting.
And putting value into making those decisions, right? They're going to add
Yes.
value or monetize really.
Well, that's exciting.
Adding back those females. Yeah.
That means
that's
they're
good.
looking for the traits as well when they're trying to do it. Right? That's the exciting part.
Yeah. So I think that's been the biggest challenge for us is how do you define maternal? I mean, you could do an entire podcast on how people choose to define maternal because, man, there's a lot of varying opinions out there about that. So, and I mean, a lot of different environments and, there's the BIF this year, they talked a lot about G by E interactions and, how do we kind of quantify genetics based off different environments. And I think that's one of the things that we'll see coming in the next couple of years from, you talk about differences in genetic evaluations.
Well, that's a great podcast. It was really a lot of information on AI industry and beef on dairy. And so, Lorna, we thank you for joining us on
Thanks for having
Future
me.
Beef Show.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. It's time for Ian, Jess, and I to go behind the beef.
All right. So another great episode, huh?
Yeah, it was great. It's good to have Lorna on. She's just had so much experience in this sector. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think it's nice to sort of peel back the curtain on AI companies and what drives the business and some of the things they're working on that we don't get to see. Everybody picks up a book and wonders what goes into those bull selections and stuff like that.
Well, and I think it's just an interesting perspective because they come out of dairy, and I think on the beef side, sometimes you worry that, well, they're competing with me, but then when Lorna explains it in the way she does of like, these are so highly terminal that we need to go after, that it just doesn't compete with the seed stock guys. Like, it really does add that perspective in terms of what's happening. And then, beef on dairy has been an amazing trend over the last 3-4 years, like in terms of the cattle we're producing, and she's been at the forefront of it and learning and seeing and making changes. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think good to remind our listeners, for those of you that maybe don't have experience with the beef on dairy industry, it's not a replacement for native beef animals. It's a replacement for the straight bred Holstein animal. And that wasn't an ideal candidate for the feed yard sector. And so as we look further and further into the future of the beef on dairy industry, it is, those terminal traits that are going to be successful on the rail. And what's interesting is that the more that we dive into the yield grade equation and better understanding total body muscle, those traits are definitely not ribeye area in a lot of scenarios, right, for correlation to total body muscle. And so it's very interesting to think of how our bull selection and our sire selection in the future is going to look different even from how it looks today once we adopt and adjust different functions within our industry.
Yeah, and that's such a great point because it's like, and also beef on dairy being capped as it is, there's only a certain amount of dairy cows. That's got nothing. Beef can go up and down. And, we're in a market today where we need more beef cattle in some ways. Like there's packing plants shutting down days. But some of the learnings, which I thought was also interesting, of like, how do we think about the learnings out of beef on dairy and apply it to beef, and how does that change the way we may breed heifers in the future in terms of being a lot more targeted and, things well, like genomics, Jim, in terms of what that can do for the beef industry. I think, we always want to look to where the next innovations are coming. And I think dairy's had some really interesting stuff over the last while.
Yeah, I think it was good, Jessica, that she said they were going to buy a lot more Charolais bulls in the future too. That was encouraging.
Definitely for those jerseys, you can have a lot more Charolais.
That was a great episode. I enjoyed getting that AI perspective and artificial insemination perspective. It's interesting. We have to clarify that these days.
Now we have to clarify it for sure. But it is interesting to see where that goes in the future. There has been consolidation in that industry, and the combination with what they're doing, with what the genomics companies are doing, with what data companies are doing, like, there's a lot of people that are going to have to collaborate to really get effective breeding on the back. And, I know didn't hit the episode, but just chatting about it afterwards in terms of how do we make that secure for producers while at the still time getting better results. And I think there's going to be some really just interesting stuff. And producers who want to learn are going to have to work out how they collaborate and how they be partners with some of these companies in the future, and to stay at the forefront, and but protecting themselves at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, as much as we'd like to get back to old style ranching phenotype and things like that, data's not going away.
Yeah.
And the people that are going to lead in this industry in the future are going to be the ones that collect data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's everyone from, and there's way more commercial producers that, 20 years ago, you'd look at them and be like, they're a seed stock producer in what they're doing, but these commercial producers are doing a lot of the practices that seed stock guys have now been doing 10 years ago. And it's, I think that's the really interesting thing, is like, it's not just from dairy, like, commercial producers are learning from seed stock as well in terms of how to develop cattle faster and better.
That's it for this episode of the Future of Beef Show. And a big thank you to our guest for joining us and sharing their experience and insights on this topic. Hit the subscribe button for more great episodes like this one. If you want to dig deeper into what you heard today, head over to futureofbeef.com, where you'll find free resources and helpful links. Don't forget, we'll pick one listener to win this exclusive Future of Beef Yeti Cooler. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and drop us a message for a chance to win. Until next time, keep your boots on the ground and your eyes on the future.